Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. My name is Blair, or the iilluminaughtii, and today I'm going to be talking about SeaWorld. They're not an MLM, they're not selling products in the way that many of the companies I talk about do, but they have definitely got a very muddled history, especially concerning animal treatment and very specifically orca whales. While I absolutely adore animals, my own puppy Casper is the sweetest little love of my life, and I can't imagine for a minute mistreating him, let alone standing by and saying nothing when others would. So with that being said, let's dive right into today's video and see what SeaWorld has to hide. For those of you who are not familiar with SeaWorld, they are a chain of theme parks that was originally founded in 1964 and based out of Florida. The difference between them and Kenobi Lake Park or Six Flags or your other standard or regional theme parks is that they're sort of a mishmash of aquariums and theme parks put together. They feature marina animals like orca whales, sea lions, dolphins, and are known for doing shows with them. 4 people founded SeaWorld: Milton C. Shedd, Ken Norris, David DeMott, and George Millay. Funny enough, SeaWorld was actually meant to be a restaurant with a marine show attached, but as a cool idea of these 4 frat brothers thought it was, turns out a marine show restaurant wasn't all that feasible in the 60s. So they made an aquarium and SeaWorld began. However, right from the very start, SeaWorld hasn't really been known to take proper care of their animals, and again, especially the orca whales that made them famous. They can say that they've rescued over 36,000 wild animals through their conservation fund, but as great as that is, if they're harming orca whales in the process, then what really is the point in the first place? That's like saying you've rescued thousands of puppies from the streets while you're putting your own dog into fighting rings. Now, as we continue, please know that some of the topics we're going to be discussing might be disturbing, and if you can't or don't want to hear about animal abuse and death, I completely understand if you're going to click away, although I'm going to give the usual warnings. This whole video is chock full of them, so this is your heads up now that this might be the one to skip if you can't stomach this. I'm sure many of you have heard the name Shamu before, when it comes to SeaWorld especially. It's a term that means friend of Namu, the first ever orca whale to be displayed and perform shows also in the 60s. Namu unfortunately died after just 1 year in captivity, and you'd think that this might deter SeaWorld from doing the same thing again, but obviously it didn't. SeaWorld has made the word Shamu famous. Just like Namu the Killer Whale movie, they've gone on to make many Shamu the Killer Whale shows. They've even trademarked the name Shamu itself. Now, PETA paints a pretty disturbing picture, saying that whalers harpooned and killed Shamu's mother in front of her, and that's the so-called origin story of SeaWorld's first performing orca. But of course, we all know how I feel about using PETA as a source. They literally quote themselves as a source on SeaWorldofHurt.com, which is a website they own. Bottom line of the article has the little brought to you by PETA sign, and I just really don't particularly trust us. Regardless if this has been dramatized, unsourced PETA story is true, one thing is for certain. Shamu was a wild whale taken in by SeaWorld. Only 6 years after capture, Shamu passed away, apparently from a uterine infection. Now, the timeline is a little fuzzy about whether or not this happened in 1971 or in 1972. Annette said in a CNN transcript this was 1972, but Shamu passed away in 1971, so I'm not sure if this is a different Shamu entirely or CNN was a year off. Either way, there's video footage of this on YouTube and it's extremely disturbing, and I'm not going to show it. The first notable incident at SeaWorld happened when Annette was a secretary there in the early 70s and was asked to ride Shamu for a publicity stunt. And let's make something absolutely clear here. She was a secretary, not a trainer, not a marine biologist. She was a secretary. She was not qualified to do this. She didn't ask to do this, but SeaWorld, for whatever reason, decided they'd stick her on the whale, film her riding it around, and use it to promote Shamu. Now, obviously, I'm mentioning this because it didn't go well, because if it did, I wouldn't talk about it. Here's how CNN describes the clip. She's completely at the mercy of the killer whale. Annette struggles for air as she's pushed through the water. Another trainer brings in a rescue pole and Annette reaches for it, but before she's pulled to safety, the creature rams her again, ripping the pole from her hands. The whale bites down on her leg and won't let go. The trainers know if they pull too hard, her flesh will be shredded by the animal's giant teeth. One of the trainers forces the whale to open its jaws and the injured woman is pulled to safety. Annette said she had 200 stitches from the waist down, lacerations, and punctures from the incident, and this was done all for promotion. This, if anything, in this one singular incident should have been the wake-up call for SeaWorld, not only because Shamu clearly was a killer whale, but an animal that was not suited for captivity in the first place. Orca whales have a lifespan that's equivalent to a human, or at least they should. But from stress, injuries, disease, and infections, orcanetwork.org says that in captivity, that number is cut down to 10 years or less. By human standards, orca whales are still children when they're dying in their tanks. In 2011, it's estimated that 157 have died in captivity, and this does not include stillborns or miscarriages. Not to mention, they're being bred at SeaWorld too, and far younger than what they would in the wild. In natural orca communities where mating is governed by cultured traditions along with diet, language, etc., the first calf is born when the mother is about 14 to 15 years old. At SeaWorld, females are often bred much earlier at 6 or 7 years old, indicating either artificial inducement by hormonal supplements or the absence of cultural restraints or both. SeaWorld officials, however, have a history of arguing with the facts. In the 80s, scientists came out saying that the lifespan of an orca in the wild is between 30 to 100 years. But SeaWorld, of course, had to dispute that and said that 30 years is the top end of the scale and that predators don't do well in the wild. Okay, just think that one through for like 1 minute, but okay, sis. Orca whales were doing just fine until you took them from your home and made them perform for fun and money. The only reason the lion population in Africa is decreasing is because the human population is rising. So don't sit there and tell me that predators don't do well in the wild when it's kind of the humans that are fucking things up for the animals, not the environment itself. Larry Cornell, SeaWorld's vice president and zoological director, went on to say that the whales were better off with them because they were dying in the ocean. One whale had an infected jaw and the other a bullet wound. Both were rescued by SeaWorld only to die in captivity in about 5 years. And here's the thing, if you see an animal hurt and injured in need of medical attention, of course you want to rescue it. Heal the bullet wound and infected jaw all you like. That is a fantastic and important service, and I cannot and will not criticize that aspect. But then they put them in a prison, a bathtub really, and it suffers and dies there. I mean, if I were that whale, I would rather have a few years left in total freedom and happiness than suffering and dying in a cage. That's my opinion, obviously, but I think the way this vice president speaks, it's just like as if he deserves a pat on the back for treating 2 whales that died in 5 years, and that's just really not an achievement. Before we get even deeper into the treatment of these whales, however, we have to talk about Tilikum. He was captured in Iceland and originally brought to Sealand. Tilikum was an orca that was later known to be disruptive and potentially dangerous. He was placed in a holding pool to be separated, and his health deteriorated after Sealand so much that SeaWorld had to get a permit to move him on a medical emergency basis. And Tilikum did live up to his dangerous reputation and then some. One man that worked with the whale said that while he really liked to work with Tilikum, he had serious safety concerns with the orca handling that led him to quit his job. He later wrote a letter to the Federation of Humane Societies in 1989, but it wasn't until 2 years later in 1991 when his worst fear was recognized and confirmed. At the time, the orca was in Sealand of the Pacific, a public aquarium in British Columbia, Canada. A young woman, Kelty Byrne, was a 20-year-old marine biology student and a part-time trainer. She was studying the orca whales, misstepped, and fell halfway into the pool. Even though she was a competitive swimmer, she didn't stand a chance against the killer whales in the tank. Steve Huxter, the head of animal care at the time, said they never had a plaything in the pool that was so interactive. They just got incredibly excited and stimulated. And this excuse leaves such a bad taste in my mouth. To call this biology student who lost her life a plaything comes across as so cold and so callous. I understand that to the whales, that's what she may have been. But if I were Huxter, I would have said this is a needless death. More precautions should have been taken, and I see now these whales are not suitable for our aquarium. A woman has died, but all he says is, they were just excited. And to be clear, her death was gruesome. When trainers issued recall commands and threw food in the water, the orcas ignored them. Twice she surfaced and screamed, but after 10 minutes, and when she surfaced a third time, she made no noise at all. She had drowned. Obviously, and thankfully, really, there is not footage of this, but it reminds me of what happened with Annette. Seeing the video of her being pushed around, bobbing in and out of the water, I can only imagine how horrifying this is, and then to add 2 whales and then to ultimately die from this is just, it's hard to imagine. Paul Sprong, 41, director of Orca Lab in British Columbia, which studies orcas in the wild, did part-time research at Sealand before Tilikum arrived. He is not so befuddled. If you pen killer whales in a small steel tank, you are imposing an extreme level of sensory deprivation on them, he says. Humans who are subjected to those same conditions become mentally disturbed. Byron's death led to a coroner's inquest, which recommended a series of safety improvements to Sealand. The park responded, but according to Huckster, the wind came out of right sails for the business. In the fall of 1991, Sealand contacted SeaWorld to ask if they would like to buy Nuukta, Haida, and Tilikum. Sealand closed in 1992. Even after that tragic incident, SeaWorld did not wake up. So, what happened? Well, the whales just suddenly adapted in SeaWorld and started behaving. No, that's absolutely not what happened. In 1999, a man was found dead on the back of Tilikum after hiding in the park at closing time. This is what National Geographic had to say. SeaWorld is a multi-billion-dollar enterprise entirely dependent on the draw of its killer whales, orcas with reputations as playful and lovable, not murderous. I had little doubt the story had heavy spin. There is strong circumstantial evidence that Tilikum may have killed again. He was moved to SeaWorld Orlando, where a drunk climbed in over the wall one night and was found drowned in the whale's pool the next morning. The second case, the 1999 death of Daniel Dukes, was more ambiguous because there were no witnesses. The facility had cameras above and below the water, but SeaWorld claims none captured the event. The SeaWorld theory was drowning and hypothermia. More details have come out since. This was a case of hypothermia in which the deceased was found the next morning draped over the back of Tilikum with his genitals bitten off. The New York Times eventually published an article that did state, according to a medical examiner, Mr. Duke suffered hypothermia and drowned. But the lawsuit his parents filed says that the puncture wounds on Mr. Duke's leg were consistent with his having been pulled into the pool by the whale. Since SeaWorld's cameras didn't capture the event, I guess we can't know for sure if he jumped or was pulled. The lawsuit was voluntarily dismissed by the Duke family later on, though we can't be sure if that's because they settled out of court or the Dukes stopped pursuing the issue. Either way, Tilikum was involved in yet another death. This should have told SeaWorld once again that this whale was dangerous. This should have been a wake-up call again, as if the others were not, and another red flag. But as we know time and time again with these multi-billion-dollar corporations, the greed outweighs the logic, and I swear it seems like these CEOs have absolutely no hindsight whatsoever. The third death Tilikum was involved with was the final straw and the most infamous, and the one that led to the documentary we're going to talk about called Blackfish. This was the death of Dawn Brancheau. On February 24th, 2010, Dawn was a 40-year-old trainer at SeaWorld and entertaining guests in Orlando, Florida. An article called "The Killer in the Pool" described the event in detail. The show ended around 1:30 p.m. As the audience started to file out, Brancheau fed Tilikum some herring. Tilikum floated inert in the pool alongside her, his nose almost touching her shoulder. Brancheau was smiling, her long ponytail flaring out behind her. Jan Topoleski, 32, a trainer who was acting as a safety spotter for Brancheau, told investigators that Tilikum took Brancheau's drifting hair into his mouth. Brancheau tried to pull it free, but Tilikum yanked her into the pool. In an instant, a classic tableau of a trainer trainer bonding with a marine animal became a life-threatening emergency. Topoleski hit the pool's siren, staff raced to the scene. It was scary, Dutch tourist Suzanne de Witt, 33, told investigators. He was very wild. SeaWorld staff slapped the water's surface, signaling Tilikum to leave her. The whale ignored the command. Trainers hurried to drop a weighted net into the water to try and separate Tilikum from Brancheau, or herd him through 2 adjoining pools and into a small medical pool that had a lifting floor. There, he could be raised out of the water and controlled. Eyewitness accounts and the sheriff's investigative report made it clear that Brancheau fought hard. She was a strong swimmer and dedicated workout enthusiast who ran marathons, but she weighed just 123 pounds and was no match for a 12,000-pound killer whale. Tilikum refused to give her up. Trainers were forced to pry his jaws open. When they pulled Brancheau free, part of her arm came off in his mouth. Tilikum, who had been involved in 2 marine park deaths in the past, had killed her. Every safety protocol that we had failed. SeaWorld Director of Animal Training, Kelly Flaherty Clark, told me a month after the incident, her voice still tight with emotion. That's why we don't have our friend anymore, and that's why we are taking a step back. And that, honestly, was hard to read. Every single protocol failed. Everything they were taught to do, every precaution failed. All because he grabbed her ponytail and pulled her in. And this was a woman that had been working with orcas for years, but it didn't matter. And that's because orca whales are not safe. They are gorgeous, beautiful creatures, yes, but they are obviously not meant to be kept in captivity. This isn't the only case of whales attacking trainers either. Even though Dawn was the first trainer to die, another trainer, Peter, was attacked 4 years beforehand in 2006 by one of the orcas. He was held underwater for over a minute and managed to get away with only a broken foot. What did the head trainer say then? It was just unfortunate.
There are times like this when they are killer whales, and she did choose to demonstrate her feelings in a way that obviously was unfortunate. And we are unfortunate that our guests did have to see this, and we obviously do not want this.
They had so many opportunities to change and to rethink things. All the way back from the 70s to the incident in 2010, they could have stopped shows, but because it brought in money, SeaWorld kept it up. One former trainer said that in a 2006 report, the only reason trainers needed to get in the water with these whales was for entertainment purposes. And look, I disagree with keeping orca whales in captivity in the first place, but to have people getting in the water with them is asking for trouble. These are giant predators, and even their precautions couldn't save Dawn's life. In 2013, the backlash against SeaWorld truly began. It started first when a pilot whale, a type of dolphin, became beached at one of its exhibits. The entire scene was caught on camera, and the audience was outraged. Not just because it happened, but because it took nearly 20 minutes for the trainers to return the pilot whale to the water. And what did SeaWorld have to say about that? The pilot whales come out onto the ledge all the time. The animals seem to enjoy it, and it has no effect on their health or well-being. So just remember, they live in water, not land. They don't do this half and half shit. So no, SeaWorld, it's not a good look to just blame the whale, okay? But let's take a look at some of the science of it. So do pilot whales beach themselves? Yes. But it's not because they enjoy it. The theory among researchers is that sonar can screw up their steering, there's illnesses, disorientation, or maybe your tanks aren't big enough. I haven't seen a single theory online that says whales beach themselves for funsies. That's like saying, I might just keep my head underwater for 20 minutes because lol, that's such an entertaining thing to do. But this is just the tip of the iceberg for 2013. Around that same time, the documentary Blackfish was released, an entire documentary devoted to how orca whales have been mistreated, especially Tilikum. Despite Tilikum being a large focus, a lot of other problems came to light because of this documentary. Many former SeaWorld trainers spoke out in this documentary, coming forward with their stories about animal treatment and their experience. And what do many of them have to say at the very beginning?
It really is more about your personality and how good you can swim.
The only 2 requirements were how well can you swim and your personality. And why is that? Because trainers aren't scientists. They aren't specialists, marine biologists. Some of them might be, but it's not a requirement. They're entertainers. And I mean, hey, I guess to some degree it makes sense. That way you don't really have to pay the employees as much for getting that degree. One guy said he had never even put on a wetsuit before. He put it on backwards on his first day. That's not me trying to insult him for not knowing or anything, but it tells me that SeaWorld was not hiring professionals. The documentary goes on to show an old interview with Dawn, the woman who was killed by Tilikum. She was, by all accounts, a model trainer. What happened to her, the former trainers say, could have happened to any trainer. And again, Tilikum showed no mercy. This wasn't a playful creature because, again, that's not what they are. A SeaWorld paramedic told the Orange County detective Revere that she was scalped and he, Tilikum, swallowed her arm. Tilikum didn't play with her, so let's just get that straight. He ate her. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, case against SeaWorld was mentioned after that. SeaWorld recognized the inherent risk of allowing trainers to interact with potentially dangerous animals, said Sidney Coe, OSHA's regional administrator in Atlanta, Georgia. Nonetheless, it required its employees to work within the pool walls, on ledges, and on shelves where they were subject to dangerous behavior by the animals. A serious citation is being issued for exposing employees to a fall hazard by failing to install a stairway railing system on the front side left bridge of the Believe stage in Shamu Stadium. OSHA issues a serious citation when death or serious physical harm is likely to result from a hazard about which the employer knew or should have known. Fines came to light in later years, but we'll get on to SeaWorld's future in a minute. What's shown next in the documentary is the way the orca whales are captured, and I'll acknowledge it now, SeaWorld isn't capturing orcas from the wild anymore. However, seeing as Tilikum was taken from the wild, I do believe this is still worth mentioning. The boats sent to catch these whales corral the orca whales, so they're trapped in one area. They take the smallest ones because of shipping costs, but then when they lower the corral, the other whales have the option to leave. And this broke my heart because they don't leave at all. The other mothers and babies stay because of the community bond. The whole family is there communicating with the young whales. One man says he even started crying as he realized what he was doing. It's like kidnapping a little kid from its mother. When the whole hunt was over, he says there were 3 dead whales in the net. They cut the whales open, filled them with rocks, and sank them. When this came to light, these fishermen, hunters, kidnappers, whatever name you feel is appropriate, were told not to come back to Washington state to find orcas.
They were finally ejected from the state of Washington by a court order. In 1976, it was SeaWorld by name that was told, do not come back to Washington to capture whales. Without missing a beat, they went from Washington to Iceland and began capturing there.
And in 1983, at 2 years old, that's exactly where Tilikum was found. There's more detail in the documentary about how Tilikum was treated when he and another whale were trained. They both were deprived of food or punished if they didn't perform the tricks properly. The other whale would be angry at Tilikum if he didn't do well, since they were both getting punished for it, so he would drag his teeth across him. They call it raking in the documentary, and the scarring looked pretty severe. So seriously, with Tilikum's horrific origin story here, is it really any wonder that he completely lost his shit and killed someone? After that, the documentary continued to detail the life of Tilikum as we've already gone over, but something in particular did catch my ear.
And to this day, there's no record of an orca doing any harm to any human in the wild.
There is no record anywhere of a killer whale doing any harm to anyone in the wild. And it's true, I seriously took a look. And just let that sink in for a moment. This is one of the ocean's greatest predators, and yet they will not go after humans in the wild. They're pretty friendly in the wild, good-natured, and there's some adorable clips online and in the documentary of orcas making these adorable chirping noises and allowing strangers to pet them. Yet they are far more dangerous and volatile, as we've seen in Captivity. I love animals, and this is breaking my heart to know that humans and SeaWorld can turn these loving, sweet creatures into traumatized, poor animals just lashing out because they don't know what to do with their life anymore. Howard Garrett and the orca researchers say how intelligent they are. They use languages, have immense communities, and there's proof that they have emotional lives. When pilot whales are beached, as we mentioned earlier, it's often in groups because they stay by one another. Howard, for all his research, says whenever he studies the orcas, he never gets out of the boat because he knows better.
I've spent a lot of time around killer whales, and they're always in charge. I never get out of the boat. I never mess with them. The speed and the power is quite amazing.
Rules are the same as a pool hall.
Keep one foot on the floor at all times.
So let's get back to Tilikum in the documentary. Apparently, since the orca whale community is more matriarchal, as they say, male whales often keep to the perimeter of the group. But because Tilikum was in a small pool, really, and with other female whales, they would beat him up, trying to get him to move to the edge of a perimeter he just didn't have. As a result, he was kept in isolation for his own protection most of the time, and with the females just for breeding purposes. So let's just reiterate what happened here. Tilikum was captured at 2 years old in a traumatic way and stripped from his entire community. Then he was raked by another whale at Sealand training because he was learning and making mistakes. Then at SeaWorld, the females he was with would beat him up, or he was kept in isolation. So again, I ask a pretty obvious question. Is it really any wonder that he killed someone? Sure, he's adorable in the videos shown, and may not have seemed scary, but as sweet as he acted, I'm not surprised he snapped. But what's messed up is that the trainers were not told of his past or why to exercise caution. A trainer that filmed the show caught on camera one occasion where Tilikum looked like he was lunging towards someone, and then he was told to erase the footage completely. Even though we may like to think that these bonds are based on more than just trainers giving them food, it doesn't seem to be true. There's more stories, more tragedies as the documentary continues. Baby Shamu, SeaWorld's first baby whale, was removed from her mother when she was only 4 to 5 years old because she was challenging her mom at shows. The mother truly grieved, screaming and crying when a former trainer said she'd never seen her do that before. A senior researcher that analyzed the vocals said they were long-range vocals. The mother was trying to use her voice, this technique, to find her baby. Vocals they'd never heard before. The sound is extremely heartbreaking, and I was genuinely moved by them. Like, almost brought to tears by the sound of this mother just crying for her baby to try and find her child. And SeaWorld did this so the shows could make more money. They spread lies, saying that in the wild, orcas live to about 25 to 35 years old, or even longer in the facilities because of vet care. In the wild, they live less, the SeaWorld employees say. 25% of dorsal fins have a curve, they'd say. Curved dorsal fins are because of the collagen breaking down. When whales are exposed to warm air, their dorsal fins will collapse. Biologists have studied that after only a month in captivity, a group of studied whales had collapsed dorsal fins. Once they returned to the wild, they reverted to normal. SeaWorld says it's because they're in the same family, so they have the same traits. But they're not. They've got killer whales from all over the world together. They've got whales that don't speak the same language, that are from different cultures, that haven't grown up together, all thrown in a small tank together. So there's aggression that doesn't exist in the wild, whale on whale fighting, and it's just part of your daily existence, a former trainer said. In captivity, they can't get away. They can't leave another one alone. Whales have killed each other trying to assert dominance, and again, this hyper-aggression, these behaviors, they simply aren't what we see in the wild with orcas. This documentary is absolutely chock full of examples like this. Videos that show a whale jumping onto the trainer where SeaWorld says it's a training error, a woman putting her foot by an orca, seemingly trying to desensitize the orca to it to build a bond, and then the young woman being pulled into the water. One of the trainers managed to get the orca to let her go because they opened the gate, signaling that another whale, one that was more dominant in the facility, was coming in, and the list goes on. 70 plus killer whale training accidents, and one former trainer says she was informed about none of them. There's footage of people being slammed, being pulled, whether in front of an audience or not. Even outside of SeaWorld, at Laurel Park in Spain, a trainer passed away. The whales that were being trained in Spain were, of course, whales from SeaWorld. They sent 4 orcas to Laurel Park, and the best trainer was torn to shreds. Dave, an OSHA expert witness, said those were SeaWorld's whales, trained using SeaWorld's techniques, and their training was being supervised at the time by a senior trainer from San Diego. But Kelly Clark, the SeaWorld head trainer, said in court she didn't know that they were affiliated in any way with SeaWorld. Sure you didn't. It's just such a fucking lie. Like, how do you not know that 4 whales trained by SeaWorld and sent off to Spain were yours? How do you not know that? Were you stupid? Or are you just trying to like cover up in court? Like what's the deal here? But do you want to know what the most fucked up part about all of that is? Is the entire thing of like the entire video. Blackfish sheds a light on why Dawn was killed by Tilikum. And it's not exactly what we thought. I went through media sources from that day and found the whole, oh, he snapped and grabbed her ponytail story multiple times. And hey, it makes sense why Tilikum lost it after all that we've said and found. But that's the story that's been fed to us, and it's not even true. Tilikum made a small mistake in his performance. One former trainer says he believes that the orca didn't hear the whistle when he was swimming around the pool to put a fin up. So Tilikum, wanting food at the end of his performance, kept swimming around the performance area with a fin in the air. Dawn, because he didn't technically stop in time, gave him a neutral response. In other words, she waited to give him food, and the food that he got, well, not so great. She was towards the end of a bucket of fish, they were getting smaller, and Tilikum was acting frustrated, not listening as much, not performing as well. Former trainers have said this, analyzing the video. Then, at the end, it was relaxing, bonding time as the performance finished. He took out his frustration on her and rolled over her. This wasn't him snapping, losing his temper all at once. This was a I can't take it anymore build-up moment. These whales were underfed, he was getting small fish towards the end, possibly annoyed by a neutral response, and this was after years of this treatment. So, it's not exactly as random as SeaWorld made it sound. Thad Lassenack, a SeaWorld executive, went on air and said if Dawn were here, she'd be saying it was her fault he grabbed her ponytail. He blamed her for having her hair up in a fucking ponytail, when the fact is that these orcas were starving, agitated, performing, and on edge. This was in no way the trainer's fault. There's other photos of trainers with ponytails, first of all, and how dare this executive blame their recently deceased worker for their own death when they were the ones who put her in a tank with killer whales. Her family is undoubtedly grieving, devastated, and this guy is putting words into a dead woman's mouth. I really can't put it much better than one father and former trainer did when he said,
I'm not at all interested in having my daughter, who is 3.5, grow up thinking that it's normalized to have these intelligent, highly evolved animals in concrete pools. I don't want her to think that's how we treat the kin that we find ourselves around on this planet. I think it's atrocious.
Tilikum, if you were wondering, was kept in near isolation for the next 7 years after that incident until passing away in 2017. SeaWorld has called the documentary Blackfish misleading and agenda-driven, but there's no doubt it's had an impact on how people see them. It's been nominated for BAFTA Best Documentary, picked up by CNN, and supposedly even changed how the movie Finding Dory depicted its aquarium. Stocks and attendance at SeaWorld dropped, and they had to pay $5 million in fraud charges in 2018 for minimizing the effect of the documentary. They misled investors about the impact, denied its validity, but sure, this footage, this video evidence and undeniable proof spoken from the mouths of your former trainers is all just misleading. OSHA required that SeaWorld's trainers stand behind a barrier during shows after this, but ultimately, the fallout has been tremendous. In 2016, then SeaWorld CEO Joel Manby went on TV with the Humane Society of the United States to announce the massive decision. As society's understanding of orcas continues to change, SeaWorld is changing with it. By making this the last generation of orcas in our care and reimagining how guests will encounter these beautiful animals, we are fulfilling our mission of providing visitors to our parks with experiences that matter, Manby said via a prepared statement released the day of the announcement. The shows have been phased out as well, and as soon as last year, the entertainment shows in Florida and Texas have come to a close. The shows are ending, and SeaWorld won't have any new orcas. Society's understanding of orcas isn't really what changed their mind, in my opinion. I'm betting it's the fact that they don't want another Blackfish fallout or another trainer's death on their hands, not because of the responsibility, but only because of the backlash. So, I understand I'm probably a little late to the party on this one because SeaWorld is seeming to change their ways. But even so, as long as there are orcas in their exhibits, I won't be supporting them. Simply for the fact that it's like keeping them in a bathtub. They're meant to be in the ocean. Aquariums, zoos, they all have the potential to be nurturing environments, but some don't take that responsibility. I've heard of some animal exhibits around the world that take in wild animals that truly can't survive in the wild anymore, whether that's because of an injury or that they were born there, etc. But learn about whales on a whale watch, alright? Orcas are not meant for captivity. It's not in their nature, and how would you like to be trapped in one small room with strangers you don't know and performing tricks if you want your food? If the conditions you hear about in a zoo, aquarium, or theme park aren't conditions you would want to put your beloved pet in, then maybe they shouldn't be conditions that any other animal is forced into either. SeaWorld, it's great that there won't be any more orcas there one day, but it's too little too late. Given how they've treated their trainers and their animals for 60 years and the danger that they put people in, the abuse, I just don't ever see the moment where they're going to have my support or where I'll ever visit them. With that being said, that's where I'm going to end today's video. So thank you guys so much for watching. I love you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!